There's a chair beside me.
We'll get this meeting called to order February 18th at 4 o'clock. David Good.
Yes. Here.
Peggy Gray. Yes. Sheriff Ronnie Watson.
Here.
Director Travis Steele.
Here.
Gerald Moore.
Yes.
Jamie Miller.
Here.
John Renee.
Here.
Andy Stump.
He's excused. He's at work.
This time we will ask anyone from the public if they have any comments. And I do believe, Lynn, you have a public response to the public letter from Mayor Hawkins.
I do. Good from the governor. As the director of the Hawkins County 911 Emergency Communications District, I am compelled to respond to the public letter issued by Mayor John Gibson of the town of Mount Carmel opposing the cost share funding proposal. While any elected official has every right to raise concerns, Mayor Gibson's letter does so without the benefit of ever having visited the 911 center during this administration, without ever having asked a single question about our operations, and without any understanding of the conditions that existed when the current administration took over, or the critical improvements that have been made since. The citizens of Hawkins County deserve the facts, and every single one of them. They deserve to know that what we inherited was a 911 system on the verge of failure. When I was hired as the director, the 911 system serving every citizen in Hawkins County was in a state of critical disrepair. What follows is a comprehensive factual account of every system, its conditions at that time, and why the changes that were made were not optional, they were a matter of life and death. The phone system, the single most critical piece of equipment in a 911 center, was failing on a routine basis. The audio quality was forcing call takers to ask callers to repeat themselves multiple times due to severe reverb and distortion. This was reported to the vendor repeatedly. The vendor refused to fix it. When the issue was raised on industry forums, a corporate employee actually called and spoke to me. I sent audio samples to the corporate company, and they literally responded with, "That's terrible, I couldn't understand it." Yet the problem was never resolved. In the middle of active emergency calls, the phone system would freeze completely. The only solution was for your partner to barge in onto the call and take it over, if they wasn't already on a call. We only worked 2 dispatchers per shift at the time. We were operating with only 2 dispatchers per shift. Approximately once every 2 weeks, the system failed so severely that all 911 lines had to be abandoned and rolled over to Granger County, which only had 1 extra console for us to use at the time. One of our dispatchers would have to drive to Granger County to handle our calls. Because there was no secondary phone system, dispatchers were forced to use their personal cell phones to communicate from Granger County back to Hawkins County. There was recently something put out on social media that says that they believe the 911 would never go down. It did repeatedly, and as long as we exist as a 911 center, it probably will again. While operating with only 2 dispatchers, 911 callers were being placed on hold. In one documented incident, 2 dispatchers were each handling separate unresponsive person calls on 911, while a domestic violence call was placed on hold. While the caller was on hold, he was struck by a vehicle and suffered a broken leg. While operating with only 2 dispatchers, our 911 answer times were well below the national standard, with only 84% of 911 calls answered within 15 seconds. On August the 10th, 2021, during the volunteer high school shooting hoax, our phone system crashed entirely, leaving critical public safety personnel unable to get through on inbound calls, and we were unable to make outbound calls. That system was not designed to handle the call volume. I think even, Sheriff, I think you told me at one point in time you tried to make a phone call in during that, and it would not go through. As of today, every surrounding 911 center that operated on the same phone system has declined to renew their contract with that vendor. Additionally, the vendor continues to have issues passing testing to I3 Next Generation 911 standards. The radio system would freeze, requiring a full computer restart to resume communications with field responders. The paging system would air out, requiring a computer restart before dispatchers could page EMS or fire departments. Seconds matter when someone's life is on the line. The existing radio system was not compatible with the new digital system adopted by the county. ARPA funding was utilized to acquire a new radio system to address these critical failures. Upon assuming the director role, I found the center was using computers running Windows 7, which had reached its end of life 2 years prior. One computer was still running an operating system that had reached end of life in 2017. No security patches have been applied to any of the computers. The server for the CAD system was running Windows Server 2012 with no security patches ever applied. It reached its end of life in 2023. Staff had to physically restart the server whenever it lost connection to the CAD system. The network switches were not commercial grade equipment. They were consumer products that could be purchased at Walmart. They were open and non-manageable. Ports would fail and staff had to switch cabling between ports just to maintain connectivity. Most of the network was running on DHCP instead of static addressing. The VPN was end of life and had never been updated. The CAD system would freeze and lose connection with the server during active operations. We were paying for features that we could not use but needed. I requested on multiple occasions that the vendor demonstrate how to use the features we were paying for. On one occasion, they sent a field technician to meet with me, but the technician was unable to show how the features worked or how to set them up. While we were unable to make changes to our dispatch map independently, and were at the mercy of the vendor to make changes on their timeline, the map would black out, requiring a restart before it could be used. As with the phone system, to my knowledge, every surrounding 911 center that used the same CAD system has declined to renew their contract. The vendor, which at the time was contracted for CAD, mapping, and IT services, is no longer in business and has been absorbed by a larger corporation. Someone may ask why it's important for a 911 center to always use computers and servers with current operating systems and secure networking. The answer is straightforward. We're a repository for sensitive personal data, criminal justice data, and HIPAA-protected information. We maintain full names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, driver's license numbers, social security numbers, vehicle information, and credit and debit card information. There is over 1,500 physical, security, and technical compliance points required for NCIC access. Last year, bad actors attempted to brute force attack on our network. On average, one 911 center across the nation is hit with a cyber attack or ransomware event every 60 days. Imagine if we had not updated our systems and what kind of personal information those actors could have obtained on the citizens of Hawkins County. Public safety matters, and we take the protection of citizens' personal information seriously. I would never want to inform the citizens of Hawkins County that a security breach occurred and their personal information was stolen because we were using end-of-life products. Additionally, I cannot imagine the cost of purchasing all these systems post-COVID, especially since the Windows 11 update went into effect this year. As previously stated, when I began as the director, the center was operating with 2 personnel per shift, occasionally 3. The 911 answer times were well below the national standards. Delays in dispatching were occurring as a direct result of poor staffing. We were losing staff to the private sector faster than we could recruit and train replacements. The pay was so inadequate that staff would have to work on average an hour and a half to 2 hours to be able to purchase lunch and actually drive to work for themselves. A 911 dispatcher's training requires approximately 900 hours before they are released to work independently. This is more training hours than any other public safety profession out in the field except paramedic. They are professionals and deserve to be compensated as such. We brought pay in line with the rest of the region. We increased staffing to 4 per shift and established a minimum mandatory staffing level. This was not an arbitrary number. Every staffing decision is based on data. We now maintain a 911 answer rate of 99% within 15 seconds, with an average ring time of 5 seconds or less. That means less than 1 ring on a 911 system. To speak only to the call-taking function, this center requires a minimum of 2 personnel. That figure does not include all the additional dispatch workload, which includes 3,788 hours per year of CAD data entry, 1,192 hours of radio communications, and 26,000 hours of NCIC work. We now see calls dispatched in seconds rather than minutes. I recently observed a house fire dispatch from the moment the call was answered to the time it was dispatched was 15 seconds. We have no staffing issues and maintain a waiting list now for applicants. The letter claims that the district has blown through $1 million in 2 to 3 years. Given the critical purchases documented, the math tells the full story. When I first arrived here, our bank account was $200,000. The peak of that bank account since I've been here, which included ARPA funding, which was $554,000, Section 130 funding, which was $539,326, reached a peak balance amount of $1.7 million. If you remove the ARPA funding for that, and you say that we used all of the Section 130 funding, which is given to us as non-operational funding, to update equipment, to make sure that the repairs are done to it, that would leave $606,674. Last year, we used $231,537 in reserves to balance our budget. If you include all that, that leaves $375,137. As of last week, we had over $500,000 still in the bank. If the district had blown through funding, this conversation would have happened much earlier than it has now. Every dollar has been spent for its earmarked and intended purpose. ARPA funds were used for the radio system, backup 911 center, exactly as designated. Section 130 funds are non-operational funds used to update and replace aging equipment, exactly as designated is what we done with it. Any Section 130 funds that were not used were placed in our reserves. Even though a 911 district should not use reserves for operational costs, we've been forced to do so because of the current funding model is unsustainable. If we had not made the improvements documented in this response, Hawkins County would have been helpless during Hurricane Helene. We've seen over an 800% call increase during that time. During that event, we had all 6 consoles operational and had 2 makeshift dispatch positions set up here in the EOC. The investments made in this system directly protected the citizens of Hawkins County when it mattered most. And Madam Chairman, that's my response.
We'll move right along to our new business.
Resolution in reference establish dispatch service fees and require interlocal agreements for dispatching services provided by the district. Whereas the Hawkins County Emergency Communications District, hereinafter the district, or HCECD, was created in 1993 by a countywide referendum under the authority of Tennessee Code Annotated TCA 786-106, establishing the district as a public corporation and municipality with perpetual succession. And whereas during the referendum, every voting precinct in Hawkins County voted in the affirmative to create the 911 Emergency Communications District, with a final vote of 3,164 for and 754 against. Whereas a standalone government entity, the district is its own public corporation and municipality. It is not a department, board, or agency of Hawkins County, nor is it a department of any municipality within Hawkins County, and has no taxing authority over its citizens. And whereas pursuant to TCA 786-107, the Board of Directors of the Emergency Communications District shall create an emergency communications service designed to have the capability of utilizing at least one of the following 3 methods in response to emergency calls. A, direct dispatch method, B, relay method, or C, transfer method. And the board shall elect the method it determines to be the most feasible for the district. Whereas pursuant to TCA 786-107B, each public safety emergency service provider retains its right to dispatch its own services, and dispatching by the district may be performed only if a voluntary agreement is made between such provider and the board of directors of the Emergency Communications District. Absent such agreement, the ECD has no obligation to provide dispatching services. Whereas a portion of the Tennessee 911 surcharge, currently set at $1.50 per device per month, is allocated to emergency communication districts for the operation of 911 call taking systems and related expenses. Absent an interlocal agreement, the district is not permitted to subsidize 911 surcharge for local government dispatching operations or non-emergency call taking and dispatching. And whereas the base funding for Hawkins County from the 911 surcharge is $1,176,173, and the intent of the 911 surcharge is specifically to ensure the equipment, technology, and trained personnel are in place so that a 911 call gets through and is answered. Dispatching is a separate service. The 911 surcharge funds were never legislatively intended to cover. Whereas the Tennessee Emergency Communications Board sets revenue standards for all required items, and technical standards must be met prior to using or subsidizing the 911 surcharge for other operations. Whereas the TECB does not distribute funding to public safety answering points for their operations. And whereas during an organizational meeting of the HCECD Board of Directors on September the 15th, 1994, the board was presented with three budget scenarios. One, a transfer-only method requiring no additional revenue beyond the surcharge funds. Two, a partial central dispatch for the sheriff's office, fire departments, and rescue services requiring only additional funding from Hawkins County. And three, a full direct dispatch operation requiring additional revenue from sources beyond telephone surcharge revenue. Whereas Hawkins County, the city of Churchill, and the town of Burgoynesville accepted a request to contribute to the central dispatch operation, the town of Bulls Gap and the town of Mount Carmel declined to contribute, and the town of Rogersville retained its right to conduct its own dispatching. Whereas the opinion of the board in 1994 was that all agencies that use the central dispatch operation should either provide funding in the future or the level of service by the 911 central dispatch operation would have to be reduced, forcing various agencies and organizations to find other methods of handling their own dispatching services. Whereas the same funding issue has arisen on numerous occasions throughout the history of the district, including 2011, 2012, and 2014, due to the lack of adequate funding. Whereas on at least two occasions during the history of the district, the Tennessee Emergency Communications Board was present and confirmed that if the central dispatch type operation was to continue, additional funding sources other than the 911 surcharge would be required, and provided recommendations on cost-sharing formulas. Whereas one such meeting occurred during a board meeting related to the district being placed in the distressed district category by the Tennessee Emergency Communications Board. And whereas despite these recommendations, the cost-sharing formulas were never put in place by the board of directors, and the records reflect that when the board requested additional funding from Hawkins County, the Hawkins County Commission stated that the other municipalities utilizing the central dispatch operation should also contribute to the funding. Whereas the district currently dispatches for 20 emergency service providers between Hawkins County, the town of Burgoynesville, the city of Churchill, the town of Mount Carmel. The district handles over 1 million radio transmissions annually, answers 19,080 emergency calls, an additional 37,860 non-emergency phone calls for emergency service providers, made 16,674 outgoing phone calls, and dispatched 44,372 calls for service for emergency service providers in the most recent reporting year. Whereas the district answered 99.39% of 911 calls in 15 seconds or less, and answered non-emergency lines 97.10% of the time in 15 seconds or less. Whereas the current total operating budget for HCECD is greater than the revenues received from 911 surcharge fees and the funding from Hawkins County, and approximately 80% of funding is allocated to salaries, wages, and benefits. Whereas the district currently maintains only one interlocal agreement with Hawkins County for an annual funding share of $406,720, that's not including the NCIC expense, and this amount is not sufficient to cover the cost share of dispatching county emergency service providers. Whereas the interlocal agreement with Hawkins County is to provide dispatching services to Hawkins County Sheriff's Office, Hawkins County Emergency Management Agency, Hawkins County Medical Death Investigator's Office, Hawkins County EMS, Hawkins County Rescue Squad, Churchill Rescue Squad, and volunteer fire departments in the unincorporated areas of Hawkins County. Whereas no interlocal agreements exist for the town of Burnsville, the city of Churchill, and the town of Mount Carmel for dispatching their emergency service providers, two of which are combination paid volunteer fire departments. Pursuant to TCA and TECB policy, in order to utilize 911 surcharge funds for services provided to other government agencies, an interlocal agreement must be in place. Whereas in fiscal year 2024-2025, the district experienced a negative net change of $231,537, excluding depreciation, and the budget was balanced by using reserves. A negative net change is also expected for fiscal year 2025, 2026, and fiscal year 2026-2027, with reserves expected to be used for this current fiscal year. If a balanced budget is not achieved for fiscal year 2026-27, the district will have 3 consecutive years of negative net change and be placed as a distressed district under TECB policy. And whereas once the ECD becomes distressed, the TECB will begin oversight of the district's operations and approve all spending, and will balance the budget either by consolidating the district with another emergency communications district or by ordering a reduction in services. And even then, the same fundamental issue of adequately funding dispatching will remain. Whereas the only way to reduce the budget and achieve balance without emergency service providers funding their dispatch operations is by reducing personnel. However, reducing personnel to the amount to balance the budget and maintain the same level of service that HCECD currently provides would be detrimental to the welfare and public safety of the citizens of Hawkins County, as citizens would experience wait times to speak with call takers and delays in dispatch of emergency service providers. Whereas the Tennessee Emergency Communications Board has clarified that ECDs are not required to dispatch by law, but permitted to do so if the ECD enters into a voluntary agreement with the emergency service provider. That nothing in the law states the ECD must bear the cost of dispatching solely on the funds provided by 911 surcharge, and that in most cases ECDs also dispatch do so for some negotiated funding provided by local governments. Whereas TECB Policy 8 requires all interlocal agreements in which resources, equipment, or income are shared between the ECD and another government entity to be adopted by the district's board and submitted to TECB within 45 days of execution. Whereas the intent of the 911 legislation was never for ECDs to subsidize dispatching services with 911 surcharge revenues and jeopardize the local 911 system, and is well documented that the legislative intent was not for 911 districts to bear the financial burden of dispatching, as most recently affirmed in Tennessee Senate Joint Resolution 0048. And whereas the district's continued use of 911 surcharge revenue for dispatching operations jeopardizes compliance with state law, TECB policy, and threatens the financial stability of the local 911 system itself. Whereas absent local cost sharing, continued operations at current staffing and service levels have depleted reserves and risk the district's operational capability for 911 services, its only primary statutory function. Now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Directors of the Hawkins County Emergency Communications District as follows. All public safety agencies and emergency service providers in which resources, equipment, or income are shared between the ECD and another government entity shall be required to enter into written interlocal agreements with HCECD outlining the scope of services and the associated funding responsibility in compliance with TCA 786-107 and TECB Policy 8. Be it further resolved, the district should develop a standardized, equitable fee formula for dispatch services based on a population-based formula utilizing U.S. Census data to determine population totals for each participating jurisdiction. The formula shall include the total cost of 16 full-time equivalent dispatchers, including base salary, benefits, and the annual cost of living adjustment consistent with the Social Security Administration rate. Any increase in FTE should be approved by the HCECD Board of Directors and jurisdictions participating in the central dispatch operation. The board's preferred methodology of the population-based formula relies on an unbiased and verifiable data source. Be it further resolved, the fee structure is intended solely to cover the actual cost of providing dispatch services. The adopted formula shall establish the maximum possible cost for each fiscal year. However, agencies shall only be billed for actual cost incurred. If a dispatch position is vacant, the district will not assess fees for that position until it is filled. Nothing in this resolution prevents the ECD and the jurisdiction from negotiating a lower cost for each fiscal year, which would be outlined in the interlocal agreement. Both the ECD and jurisdiction shall agree to any lower annual cost share. Be it further resolved, the district should notify all participating agencies and municipalities by March the 1st of each year of the upcoming fiscal year's dispatch service cost share. Be it further resolved, consistent with TCA and TECB policy, HCECD is not legally permitted to subsidize 911 surcharge fees to provide services to another government entity without a voluntary written interlocal agreement. If a government entity that HCECD provides dispatching services declines to enter into an agreement under this adopted cost share formula, HCECD will provide reasonable written notice and a transition timeline for the agency to resume or arrange its own dispatching operations. This ensures that HCECD's primary statutory responsibility, ensuring the 911 infrastructure is in place, operational, and answering the 911 call, remains fully funded and operational. Be it further resolved, if any jurisdiction elects to retain its right to dispatch its own emergency service providers, the jurisdiction will have to decide whether it wants to receive its 911 calls from a transfer or a relay method. The jurisdiction emergency service providers shall provide a 10-digit telephone number to HCECD by the effective date of this resolution. All costs incurred by the chosen method shall be the responsibility of the jurisdiction. If any law enforcement agency elects to retain its right to conduct its own dispatching, absent a voluntary agreed upon interlocal agreement by HCECD and the law enforcement agency, HCECD shall also discontinue serving as the non-terminal and/or terminal agency for that agency's NCIC services. And the law enforcement agency would be responsible for designating its own terminal agency coordinator and ensuring compliance with all applicable criminal justice information system, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and Federal Bureau of Investigation requirements. Be it further resolved, if any provision of this resolution or the application thereof to any person or circumstance is held invalid, the invalidity shall not affect other provisions or applications of this resolution, which can be given effect without the invalid provision or application. And to the end, the provisions of this resolution are declared severable. Be it finally resolved, this resolution shall take effect on July 1st, 2026.
We have a motion to approve this resolution.
I'll make a motion.
Second? David Good?
No. We got discussion.
last time it was brought up a year or so ago. I was 14. My reason being, they're taxing the cities twice. That's obvious. You don't even have those gap listed in there, and you still dispatch sheriff's department. They're municipality. I just can't see, I can't go along with taxing the cities twice. My suggestion would be go to the county and ask the county to fund it off. I know the mayor don't wanna hear that back there, but they just, and the reason being, when you do that, everybody in Hawkins County pays the same. Roswell City pays the same taxes, Bull Gap, Jamal, who might from everybody. That's my solution. May not be a good one, that's my solution, I just can't vote for it.
But then Rockville City's paying for a dispatch service that we have ourselves, that we already pay ourselves, so then we're being back.
Well, no, you're still paying county taxes, everybody pays county taxes.
I know, but, you know, if they pay more to cover the city's dispatching, if they're paying more just for that reason, it's because they can't meet the budget. And I'm just saying, we pay, we're on dispatch already, so it kind of, if you're raising it just for that reason, then, you know, we're getting it lost. I mean, if the money's being raised for a different reason, or the taxes are being increased for a different reason, other than dispatching, I understand, but it's just for dispatching, then we would be getting hit twice for something that we're already providing ourselves.
The only thing I have is, we're not a county entity, we're not a municipality entity, and I see your point. But that's gonna have to be a decision between the municipalities and the county. And as of date, I don't know that you could ever get them all together to make that decision. But I mean, that's a decision solely on them. And every one of them knows that we've had these workshops, we've had these meetings, and today, I don't know that that's even been discussed between the municipalities and the county. That's their decision, not ours.
So you're saying if the county would give them their amount, it would give them their amount, they can still negotiate the county plan, of course, agree.
Yeah, I mean, that's left up to the
It
cities
don't
and
make
the
sense,
counties.
as a county, pay off, and everybody pays the same, that's what I'm getting at, I'm still. We all pay county taxes, and you got cities pay city taxes on top of that, then you're wanting to double up on the cities. I can't understand that.
And
I think I'm missing something.
even if the county come back and said we're gonna pay for all of it, we still have to have that interlocal agreement with that city. A county can't make that agreement
Yeah,
with
but
that
then the
city.
city, but then the cities are not paying it, then everybody's paying the same, everybody pays the same taxes.
I understand,
Well, that's,
but that's,
but you're, I mean, like you're trying to penalize the cities for being a city and having a police department. I don't remember, for example, Boy Gap, and I live there, Lord, if I talk about housing them money for anything, you know how that be. But they don't have a police department, but you still dispatch the sheriff's department, they still answer calls there the same as everybody else. You dispatch it, Churchill didn't have a police department, but you still dispatch a deputy up there to answer the call,
absolutely.
so maybe I'm thinking.
We're still not following state statute with not having the interlocal agreements in place.
You
We're
can have the
violating
agreement
state
without
law.
charging them, right?
You could,
Well, that's what I'm getting at.
but how do you get from where we're at here to the cities and the counties getting a meeting together? That's not our responsibility. If the city wasn't responsible for their own dispatching, every city in the state of Tennessee that has to pay for dispatching, I think they would be saying the same thing. I mean, that's just my response.
That's fine, that's fine.
I don't know how we get to that point of having that meeting between the two.
You've got representatives here from the city, I guess we need to ask them some questions too, that's all right.
And they've been here at all of them. And I don't know how we get there.
How is it derived as far as charge, fee, bill, whatever, Senator pointed in on that? What's the basis of that just take place? I mean, based upon the amount of calls that you're putting out, that you have to dispatch to this agency as opposed to this one, on shift, sometimes mostly two. Okay, so you take one per shift, as opposed to Ronnie over here having, how many you got per shift?
6 on a good day.
Okay, so you got 6, so, you know, they're doing about twice as much calls as what they would be right here to cover the area, so how does that figure out? Is that a factor that's played in on that, how that's done or what?
No, there was several different cost share formulas, one being in cost per call. One being taking in the number of phone calls per agency, and the other one was population based. The population based on the cities and the counties. We decided on population based because there would be no decision in the total cost per call. Cause you still got the sheriff's office answering calls in the municipalities. So we went back to the same thing with the meeting between the two, who's responsible for that call? Even though that municipality provides that service, if they don't have anybody working, is the county going to get charged for that call, or does that get charged back to the cities? And again, nobody's gave us an answer for that.
Who knows what the right answer would be?
Exactly.
I'm just curious as to how, what criteria that was based on, was the breakdown, or is it straight across the board, P, if you will, or whatever, or is it, there's got to be something figured that's based on?
Population based, the total dispatcher count divided by the percentage of population.
So last meeting, we were asked to calculate a break even with a percentage on top of it, is that the number we're still at?
That was the last formula that I distributed.
And if you have any, response from the cities, what your perception was?
No.
And my next thing is a statement, I'm gonna put Teresa on the spot here. I've sat in this room and rooms like it with TEC being before, and their presentation has never changed. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Every time they get involved, their presentation is exactly the same.
I just have a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
Maybe more. The last, nobody percentage I received, June 16th, September 7th. Can you give me an update on that? Call volume percentage?
As far as the total for,
And I think, can you send those numbers back to us then? And like the county, 73% population, and Hawaii was 86%. On down to Lawrenceville, 2%, Colorado, Oklahoma 3%, and Churchill 8%. So, you have any additional numbers for that?
that's the most recent.
Most recent.
That was figured off of last year's annual report, I think. Let me look real quick.
What was the end date on that? The ending date?
September 7th.
What's the minimum, increase above breaking even that you feel comfortable with on meeting obligations?
The,
For the communication board?
taking the total deficit, plus 15% leaves us with, I think about 94,000 in the good for next year. Since doing that, since doing the budget for next fiscal year, that's even changed again. We've had one employee take insurance coverage during open enrollment, and that's not actually included in that budget, so it would be a little less than 90,000. That's still cutting it tight. If we have a major repair, we're in trouble. We've got stuff that's at the end of life. Our uninterruptible power source is at end of life. The only reason why we're still using it is because we can get batteries for it still. as soon as they tell us that we can no longer get batteries for it, we have to change it. And I don't even know how much one of those costs, I'm sure it's 200,000 or something. You know, a lightning strike could automatically be $200,000 to $300,000 for us. So, that would be cutting it tight next year, but, 911 dispatch is easy to adapt and overcome, so we can make it work.
These are the most current numbers you got right now.
Let me just go pull that report, and I'll bring it right back. Sheriff, that is not in the last annual report, but looking at last year's totals versus the year before, it's running about the same. So it hasn't changed that much.
So this, the number's about the same, it's become 2% for Alabama, Sonoma, and 3% from Alabama, still pretty close to the same.
It's gonna be pretty close.
Was that counting, is the 86%, if you're counting on me, is probably working part-time police department, of course, most people, so.
Those numbers did not differentiate between whether that would be a county call or a city call, it's just where it fell out. So, yes, those totals includes calls answered in the cities. Yes, sir, it is. Yeah, the county is always paid in their interlocal agreement for, even with NCIC, that's in their agreement to cover Louisiana, because they don't have an emergency service provider.
I mean, employees, do you have directly for dispatch on it?
16,
And it's supervisor.
one per shift, so forth. That 16 includes a supervisor.
Okay,
Yes.
with
Yeah, it's not 16 plus 4, it's just 16 total.
So, for instance, if this comes to my office, then I'm understanding, I guess, NCIC and all that comes with,
Yes, sir.
much additional cost. And you got somebody that says they just do NCIC and Tyler and all that.
Us, the deputy director.
So that's one more position, correct? So we're looking at 17 positions that I would have to hire.
Actually, yes.
I mean, if it takes you that many, it would take me that many,
Yeah.
because call volume is 86%.
Yeah. National standard is 5 people per full-time equivalent. So if you have, say if you want 2 people dispatching, then you want to hire 5 people per that city. Plus all your additional use of NCIC.
But the county funding, I don't even didn't know that because it costs to get.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
What's the matter, you know, meanwhile, we're getting our dispatcher for sheriff's department, in the county Mansfield, or you couldn't do that.
Thing about it is that the county don't pay their request, then I have to do that. It's gonna fall on me, me to ask the county commission, about me to have to call.
I understand that, but why we do it?
He's just saying if it comes to that.
Comes to that.
Yeah.
That way, it's option, it's all on
I got
me.
it.
How much is your budget for dispatch? Dispatch, no.
They raise, we're gonna raise the rate, but now we want to charge $2.86.
That was took off notice. That was took off notice as of 2 weeks ago. You're saying, Cliff? Not including benefits, because the way our budget is, I can't break that down, all the benefits are included together. But just the dispatchers, the supervisors, and a TAC is $964,824. That's not including benefits.
We're over $1 million.
Yeah, because I mean, you have to look at IT as well.
Plus, the equipment,
The equipment alone is gonna be about $1 million.
plus, the training is gonna be,
Yes, sir.
Probably dispatch.
Maybe,
Well, that'd be lead.
Oh, yeah, I know, it's just power.
I think the city of Rogersville does just one dispatcher is 300,000, and that's just the,
Yeah, that's not counting equipment, that's not counting, expenses that come up. We're not, it's about 300,000 a year, that's just.
That's not 86% of the call volume either.
No, it's not, no, that's what it's, it's real close for us. Just amazing, that's just the person that, And that's why I think David, like, I don't think anybody here is opposed to the county paying it. We just don't know how to make that happen.
Well, I understand, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this discussion's been going on for a very long time, that I'm aware of.
That's been years now.
No, it's been.
It's
longer
the
than
state.
that, yeah.
I will say the state 911 board has asked for our official plan, not coming to streets. We're waiting on that.
It's been pushed down the road so long that we're out of places to go with it, so it's gotta be paid somehow, so we just gotta figure out how to do it.
Honestly, this has been going on for years. I had to share.
1994.
Years ago.
Yeah.
This puts me in a different position. I'm gonna go with this forward and ask for, the county $728,000, do I wanna go with county commission, that's $2.5 million, what that's gonna do. I had to have the numbers before I make a decision.
That scenario the sheriff's talking about with the answer here, transfer to the correct? Is that the scenario that was got?
For 911, yes.
So you can still have dispatch, you can still have call takers here in that type of scenario. Correct.
We'll have to have a minimum of 8.
What that should for your work rule with people that like dispatch style work as well, or for him, and what you have presented here.
All of them, still.
Yeah, that's, and, you brought up the valid point there. I think the general public thinks that we're not going to answer the 911 call when it comes to that, and that's not the case. We're statutorily required to answer that 911 call. And what happens to it can be a direct dispatch, a transfer, or a relay, but we have to answer that call. So 911 is not going on.
You said that increase was off the board, I mean, it's not in play, the phone increase that was talked about, the 911.
SJR 048 was taken off notice. We're hoping that it comes back on notice at the state level, but even then, that's only providing us an additional $325,000 per year. We have to have a reserve. We have to have one.
I agree, I just thought if they take that away, it's just more about it.
Is that funding for equipment or?
No, that's on the base rate for 911.
No, keeping that.
I foresee several years down the road that drastically increasing. There is also a statute in legislation right now, not a statute, but a bill requesting a TASER study of 911 communication districts across the state. So I foresee that 911 surcharge fee, I'm just speaking an opinion of it increasing in the next few years. I think Alabama right now is at $7 and something per device per month.
So,
Never say a word for Kendall, phone bill.
Used to, the surcharge was, I think $1.50 for residential lines, maybe $1.16 for a cell phone, and a business line was $3. And it all went to $1.50 across the board. So it's actually decreased over the years rather than increasing. We've got a motion and a second on the floor.
Are you good?
No,
Ronnie Lawson?
I guess with the reasons I stated, I just can't see going to the county commission matching $2.5 million. Yes.
John Renee?
Yes.
That would raise a lot of taxes.
Peggy Ray? Yes. Gerald Moore?
Reluctantly, yes.
Travis Fields?
Yes.
Meredith Lockwood, yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Jamie.
Yes.
Jamie Miller.
7 yes, 1 no, 1 absent. Resolution passes.
There's still an opportunity for the city to negotiate that with the county. Correct?
No further discussion around the motion to adjourn.
I'll make it one.
Who said second?
We have to.